Hey everyone, welcome back to the Trinity podcast. This is another one of our special midweek episodes in which we take some time to continue to meditate on what we've been studying on the weekends. We are now wrapping up a series that we have been calling How to Inhabit Time, looking at the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. And here with me in the studio is Roy. He's our site leader for our Green Trails location. Roy, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So you and I get a chance to wrap up this series, both on the weekend and for the midweek podcast. So looking back on the whole book of Ecclesiastes, as you've been reading through it, meditating on it, teaching it to our people, what have been some of the biggest takeaways from studying this book for you?
I think for me, it's been really great to spend just quality time in Ecclesiastes in a way that I've just never done before, and especially getting around the table with the other site leaders and you and kind of figuring it out together in what the sermons are going to look like, taking the sketches, and really just trying to get a sense of what the Spirit wants us to kind of share through this book that we're going through. And one of the great things that I've learned in teaching it and studying it with all of us together is that, Ecclesiastes kind of has a bad rap of being this super downer, just depressing book. But I think what we're able to see is that the preacher is trying to help us just realize that, hey, life on this side of eternity is what it is. This is what it is. We're going to be dealing with a lot of different things. There's going to be some highs. There's going to be some lows. There's going to be a lot of in between as well. But how can you continue to trust in God and keep your faith in Him throughout all of it? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what's been really great is that the preacher again is making us see the reality of the world that we're living in, but how even through it all God is with us. And He's strengthening us, and that we are going to get through it. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, I really love the emphasis on what I would call almost like a realistic hopefulness. Mm-hmm. This is a very realistic book, and he really drills down onto why it is we're not satisfied, this side of eternity. Why is it that we sometimes get even the best things in life and still feel empty and like it's fading away? And so he's just very realistic about the fact that each of these things is temporary. Each of them is broken. Mm-hmm. All of them, while they, some of these things might be good things, they're not lasting eternal things. Yeah. And just wrestling with that. But at the same time, you get these hints throughout the book of, he says, but this isn't all there is. Mm. This is what you see, this is what you encounter, but this isn't all there is. Over and over again, he's reminding them of, remember your Creator. Remember your God. When you go to the temple, remember this. And he just kind of seems to keep pointing and hinting at something more. And it's that invitation, I think, to be realistic on the one hand about life, but then hopeful, realizing that life under the sun isn't all that there is. Yeah. There's something more to that.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and I love the part too, I love the scripture where it talks about how God put eternity in the human heart. Mm-hmm. But then you keep reading it, and it's so that, really, and the preacher goes on to say, so that we can realize that we are mortal and He is immortal. So it's that, we have this desire to want to know more. There's got to be more than what we see. And yeah, God put that in our hearts so that we can kind of look out and wonder. Mm-hmm. And again, it's so that we can realize that there is God who is in control even throughout all the chaos that we experience in the world, mm-hmm. that we can lean on Him.
Yeah. I also love, I think the fact too in this book is there's a very, for lack of a better term, there's a lot of permission to be human, mm-hmm. To acknowledge the fact that, there are parts of life that do suck. Yeah. And that I don't have to come up with a nice explanation to explain away the fact that it hurts or that it's hard. Yeah. Which I think sometimes there can be a tendency within the church and church culture to always try to have a positive spin on everything. Right. And it's just like, oh, you don't know, it's because God is really doing this. But honestly, what the preacher says is like, you might not know what God is doing in that. It just hurts, or it's just hard, or it's just difficult.
Yeah.
And what I like about that is it allows me to do two things. It allows me to be honest about the fact that something hurts, and not to feel like I have to feel bad that it hurts, or that I have to explain it in a way that somehow that's a weakness in my faith.
Yeah.
But the other thing it does is it also brings us to a place of learning to put my faith in God, not in having an answer.
Yeah.
And I think that's oftentimes where our faith fails, is we've put our faith in an answer or in a certain outcome. Mm-hmm. And then when it doesn't come, or it doesn't happen the way we want it to, then we give up on God. And what the preacher says is, he says, you might not get an answer. Yeah. You might not even get your desired outcome. Doesn't mean that God's not there. Doesn't mean that he doesn't love you. Doesn't mean that he doesn't have eternal purposes which are greater than this. So don't put your faith in an answer. Yeah. And it's okay to acknowledge before God, this is hard. Yeah. It just allows us to be honest with life as human beings under the sun. So,
yeah. And I love how, we had said in one of the sermons last that, it's so natural for us as humans when we go through something difficult and bad in our life to maybe come up with some sort of a narrative, like you had mentioned, like, oh, well, it's because God needed another angel or whatever. Mm-hmm. And to which I really do believe God's like, I didn't say that. And that has nothing to do with it. It's because we're living on this side of eternity. We're going to experience loss and grief. But it's just so natural for us to try to come up with some narrative as to the why, like why God would do this, or come up with even another narrative of perhaps I'm going through this because God's mad at me, or because I did something wrong, or because I'm getting some sort of payback for what I've done. So we try to make sense of like the Hebel. We try to make sense of the things that we're going, that even on the flip side, so that if we get a promotion, or if we get a raise, or if we get a whatever, we then try to own that narrative too, and say that on the flip side of that story, and it's just, again, being on this side of eternity, we're going to experience all of these different things. And yeah, I think Ecclesiastes does a really great job too of just letting us be kind of present, like realize when it's difficult and hard, realize that it is, and like it's okay to stay there for a little while. I love it when science and psychology just affirm really what God has been telling us for a long time. And now that like the stages of grief, in psychology, a good therapist will like, let's stay in that stage of grief, not forever, but like, it's okay to be there, and then we'll go to the next one, and then we'll go to the next one. But similarly, what we see here is, the preacher's like, you're going to experience these highs and these lows. It's okay to be present in them. But what's important is to know that God is present with you through it all. Like through it all, he is present with you in those different stages that we experience in life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things, going back to what you're talking about with narratives too, is we run to the narrative so quickly, we never stop to think, but what is that then? If that narrative is true, what does that actually say about God? Yeah. And the picture that's often painted when we run to those narratives is that God is not really a person. He's a rewards-based system. I do bad things and bad things happen to me. I do good things and good things happen. Yeah. And that's karma. That's not God.
Exactly.
That's and what the preacher is saying is like, there is a God, and he's personal. Yeah. And he's somebody that you have to have a relationship with. He doesn't operate on a rewards-based system or a tit for tat, a give and take, a quid pro quo, none of that. Yeah. He's a God who has purposes. It was a couple weeks ago we talked about the fact that, again, he put eternity into our hearts, but only he knows the beginning and the end. Yeah. So he has an eternal purpose. Yeah. Which he desires that we would experience. Yeah. But the only way we experience it is by learning to walk with him in the day-to-day, not because we know every step of the journey. Yeah. And that is where true faith, I think, is born, is that I know a person and I have confidence in that person. And that's because of his character. Yeah. And because of his ultimate purposes, even if I don't know the minutiae of the plans. Yeah. And so it's an invitation as well in Ecclesiastes, I think, to have a truly lived and relational faith. Yeah. He's just deconstructing all that kind of rewards-based thinking around faith, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And to that, I'm even just thinking out loud of how like interesting and fun it might have even been to like bring in a psalm with like the reading from Ecclesiastes, because you read so many times in the Psalms of like, there's just so much, strife that's going on. David does a great job of even just talking about in a song that he'll write, just all the turmoil that he's going through. And then we'll end it with, but yet will I praise you. It's like that continuous, I love that hymn that says something to the effect of, oh, how sweet it is to trust in Jesus, just to take him at his word.
Yeah.
Because it's like, man, we could go through all of this. I was talking with someone in the lobby the other day at church, and she had gone through a lot over the weekend. She buried her mom on a Saturday, but that Friday got a phone call from her daughter that her daughter's husband had passed away in his sleep. And I just was like, and it's Sunday, this happened Friday, Saturday, Sunday. She's here in the cafe. And I was just like, how are you here right now?
Mm-hmm.
Just humanly. And, she was just saying through prayer. And yeah, I told her, I said, I can't imagine having to go through the things, the ups and the downs in this life without having faith and trust in Jesus. Because even though it's hard and there might be seasons when we're angry with him and shouting at him and upset, but at least we're still talking to him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I feel like maybe that's even how God feels too. It's like, just keep talking to me.
Yeah.
Even if it's this, like, just stay in dialogue with me. You know that I'm there, and that's why you're talking to me. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about endings.
Yeah.
Because now we come to the end of the book. We're in Ecclesiastes chapter 12.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about this in sermon prep. Verses 1 to 8 is just a whole heck of a lot more of the depressing. As he's kind of almost with all these different rhetorical flourishes talking about the coming of death. Uses these brilliant word pictures and images. And basically he says, hey, remember, even in the high times, because right before this in chapter 11 is like, hey, there's all these good things that God has given you, but then right on the heels of it, he's like, but don't forget, you're going to die someday.
Yeah.
And it gets to the end of verse 8, and verse 8 starts off where we began all the way back in chapter 1, verse 2, right? Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. And if the book were just to stop there, that'd be a really depressing ending, and everything that most people assume about Ecclesiastes would be true, but it's not.
Yeah.
The end of the book is verses 9 to 14, right?
Yeah.
Where we finally realize, if we didn't before, that the preacher is a character. He's not actually the author of the book. Now we hear from the author, really only in the last 5 verses.
Yeah.
And the author basically, steps out from behind the curtain and says, besides being wise, this is what the preacher did with all of his wisdom. He taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. My son, beware of anything beyond these, of making many books. There is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. And that's it. Now that's the end of the book.
Yeah.
So we talked a lot about, in prepping for this weekend, for the last weekend of the series, that really there's a choice now kind of being put in front of us, right? Yeah. We can go the road of the preacher, who used all of his wisdom to actually get people moving on a better journey. Or we can go the way of, as we called it, the way of the cynic, right? Which is verse 12, right? He says that of making many books, there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, those two options, that we're left with, the path of the cynic or the road of the preacher. As you think about those, where do you see, as you think about kind of the world that we live in today, where do you see people taking the path of the cynic? And why is the path of the preacher maybe a better option, if you were to put that in your own words?
Yeah, I just, we look at cynicism, and all it is it's just a spiral. Like, you just keep spiraling around until you just spiral out. It's just this constant, it's not only just this questioning, but it's just this just negative reaction to the things that are happening in the world. And then even for the cynic, when they experience someone who has faith, um, the cynicism within them, doesn't allow any of that to even come near them. So they're even cynical about, somebody, if they're going through something difficult in their life, but they're putting their trust and faith in God, and still they're able to find joy in the difficult moments. That the cynicism of a person will just like chalk that up to, oh, they're just being fake, or they're not wanting to live in the reality that whatever they're going through sucks and whatever. And so yeah, it's just this cyclical, and you get so spiraled into it. I feel like you can even oftentimes not realize that you are a cynic, because you're just so deeply rooted in just that headspace.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I see it, in kind of that spiraling out kind of thing. What about you?
Yeah, no, I think today, especially in our world of social media, cynicism is sexy.
Yeah.
Because there is kind of this sense that, oh, I'm so smart, I see through everything, right? And there's such an emphasis on deconstructing everything. We deconstruct our politics, deconstruct your privilege, deconstruct your faith, and your philosophies of life, as though that's the wiser road. But what we find is you can quite literally deconstruct yourself into nothing, into a very nihilistic, pessimistic way of life. And I think a lot about, this is a dated illustration, but I think apt, of guys like Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche is this titan of German philosophy. And I always say that he was my favorite Enlightenment philosopher. And people who know the history of philosophy say, what? Because the Enlightenment was really more the 1700s. Nietzsche wasn't until the 1800s. But what I mean by that is the Enlightenment was all about how, oh, we don't need things like religion or these external moral codes. We can look within, we can deconstruct, and we can find meaning like here in the human person.
Yeah.
And Nietzsche just took that to its logical conclusion. He just kept deconstructing.
Yeah.
And he said, well, if that's true, then there is no such thing as good or bad. There's no such thing as right or wrong. There's no such thing as evil. It's only what our opinions are. And the only way that there's going to be any order in our world is that somebody gets strong and powerful enough to enforce their opinion on everybody else. That's what he meant about the Übermensch, the Superman. The Superman was a person who was willing to be honest with that, and then just enforce his will on everybody. And it was such a pessimistic place. Friedrich Nietzsche took his own life. He literally deconstructed himself into nothingness.
Yeah.
And what the preacher is saying is like, you can keep deconstructing yourself into nothingness, into weariness of flesh, And what he's saying, and what I think is important, the caution that he's saying deconstruction is not an end in and of itself. It's a tool. The preacher's been using it to deconstruct the ways in which we put our hopes in things that don't satisfy, and to lead us to a better answer. And that's where the goad comes in, is he's saying, so rather than continuing to deconstruct yourself into nothingness this side of heaven, look towards something that truly is lasting. Find a better answer. Don't just keep asking the questions.
Yeah.
Questions are meant to drive us toward answers.
Right.
And I think when a lot of people are like, oh, we got to deconstruct this, it's like, yeah, but toward what end?
Right.
What's the greater purpose?
Yeah.
Because deconstruction in and of itself leaves you with empty hands.
Yeah.
And empty hearts.
Yeah.
And so I do see a lot of that. I see a lot. Everybody's quick to offer a criticism.
Yeah.
But when you ask a person, so what would you do to solve it? You get, a lot of times you get silence.
Yeah. Like, well, I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And then we just go back to criticizing.
Yeah. It's like, okay, great.
So that definitely is a way the preacher says, don't go that way. Well, the author says, don't go that way. And he actually tells us the preacher uses his insight and his wisdom to actually get people moving.
Right.
So as you think about that, what is the path that the preacher is inviting us to take? What's the journey he's inviting us to go?
Yeah, I think it's the abundant life that Jesus talks about. It's being able to just have that blessed assurance, right? That again, that God is present with us through it all, through it all. And I know, there's that cliche where there's a reason for it. Like I'm sure there's a reason for whatever, and I mean the reason is just in the person of Jesus, that he is always present with us, that he meant it when he said that he wouldn't leave us as orphans, and that the Spirit of God would be in and through us and in our midst. And so, yeah, I think that's what it looks like, in that, you can go through this life and whatever comes your way, we're trusting that we're going to get through this, but because our strength isn't within ourselves, it's not like within me of myself, but it's because of God in me, and Him, working through us to help see us to the other side. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it's that the abundant life that Jesus talks about.
Yeah. And I love that he even says, he's like, the words of the wise are like goads, like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They're given by one shepherd. So he's even acknowledging even the wisdom given to the preacher is given by God. And I immediately, as a Christian, my head goes to the very middle of John's gospel, right? Where in John 10:10 he says, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Yeah. It's the same section where he calls himself the true shepherd. Yeah. And he says, I know my sheep know me. Yeah. They hear my voice, they follow me. And then he says, and I have other sheep still who aren't even of the sheepfold that I need to go and call. I need to go and get. And what I see in the preacher is not only a willingness to walk with his shepherd toward truly lasting pastures, but to invite other sheep to go along. Yeah. And say, this is the better journey. Yeah. Stop looking for it in the things that we have shown don't satisfy. Yeah. Look for it in the one in whose image you're made and for whom you are destined. Yeah. And so really Ecclesiastes, the end of Ecclesiastes is actually a beginning. Mm-hmm. It's an invitation to start a better journey. Yeah. And that's why I love this book. It's short for a reason. It tells us the truth about life under the sun, this side of eternity, but it also reminds us there's a better road. Yeah. There's a better journey to take. Yeah. And for those who are willing to walk through it and listen to the words of the preacher, there's a whole lot of adventure yet to come. Yep. So that's what's been fun about going through this series. Yeah, it is. So, well, thanks for joining me on the podcast. Yeah. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to wrapping up the series together. Yep. Same. And for those of you at home, as always, we want to encourage you to join us in person because we meditate on these things on the weekend in worship. You can go to our website, find a Trinity location nearest you, join us on the weekend. We'd love to see you in person. And I want to let you know that we have a new series that's getting ready to start called The Nearness of God, in which we're looking at who is our God, what does it mean to have a relationship with Him, and to walk with Him toward the eternity for which we are destined. So we hope you will join us on the weekend.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Trinity podcast. We hope this week's message encouraged you to consider the claims of Jesus in a new way, and we would love to have you join us for worship on the weekend. To find a location near you, visit www.tlc4u.org.